I think it's a terrifying time to be in law enforcement. I can't imagine now why anyone would enter. I really can't.
And your family is, living the consequences of all of this.
Yeah. At this point, I don't really think that anyone feels a lot of confidence in the decisions that are being made. A lot of the blame gets put on the police by people who don't understand what roles the judges and prosecutors have in these things. Brian is a very reserved young man. He's a very industrious guy. He's always busy doing something. He's thoughtful and he's generous.
And he enjoyed being a police officer.
He did. I think that he particularly enjoyed the last couple of years when he had become a K-9 officer.
It's the hours before midnight on July 6th of 2021 that still come to mind for Ann Burgett, the mother-in-law of Brian Cummings, a Minneapolis police officer for nearly 15 years out on patrol. He pulled over to greet his family.
So for the last couple of years, and the night of the accident, Brian was patrolling with his partner, Odin the dog. As he passed by in the squad car, the kids squealed and he beeped at them. And the neighbors are passing, everybody's talking, and it was a lovely moment. The kids were excited and proud to see their dad in his uniform with the dog. And Brian was proud of what he was doing. And we were all in the community that we felt at home and loved. That was the last day it was ever going to be like that.
Not knowing then how it would change in an instant.
No. I suppose that if you are in law enforcement or someone close to you is, it must be at the back of your mind all the time to worry at least a little bit. I remember that night really clearly because it was such a delightful, happy moment. And then everything changed.
Changed when later in his shift, Officer Cummings spotted a stolen black Kia used in multiple business robberies around Minneapolis. Employees in small businesses were assaulted before money in their registers was stolen. In a statement, Cummings told Alpha News he knew the vehicle was reported stolen, and whoever was inside was listed as armed and dangerous. Eventually, investigators would connect that Kia driver, James Jones Drain, to 5 violent crimes that night. Documents say for 20 blocks, the driver refused to pull over, going nearly 100 miles per hour as Cummings chased with his lights and sirens on, until his squad ran a red light and collided with Linnell Frazier at a North Minneapolis intersection at 78 miles per hour. Frazier died at the scene. He was driving on a suspended license. MPD said Cummings was following the department's policy on pursuits when the crash happened.
He's put on suspension with pay, presumably while an investigation takes place. But that's a very, very long time for something like that to remain pending. And we were also really puzzled that there seemed to be no attempt to track down the person who had precipitated this whole incident. It was known who that person was. The vehicle was known and identified. And as far as we knew, no one went looking for it. Once the accident took place, no one looked for the wrongdoer who had set it all in motion.
Nearly 4 months later, and days before Minneapolis voters would head to the polls to decide whether to defund the police department, then Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman announced a press conference.
He announced that he, not a grand jury, was charging Brian with criminal vehicular homicide and second-degree manslaughter. And one of the media people who was there pressed back and said the statements and the records indicated that it was a policy-compliant pursuit. And Freeman said that he would charge Brian no matter what. Even at that moment, I wondered, why now? And why like this? I couldn't help but think that there was a bigger political element than there ever should be in something like that. And I've never gotten rid of that thought. It's a terrifying thing. Alexis called me and she was beside herself. And she said, they're charging Brian. Come and be with the kids. They took a mugshot of him. We've seen that one a lot. And they released him on his own recognizance.
What happened next dragged on for nearly 2 years. a guilty plea to criminal vehicular homicide from Cummings, a sentence of several months in the workhouse, 3 years probation, and the loss of his driver's license for a decade. Cummings told Alpha News he felt he had no choice to take the plea deal, believing he couldn't get a fair trial after all that's happened in Hennepin County. Taking a deal, he said, was, quote, the safest way to navigate through while trying to limit the impacts on my family.
I think that fear is driving a great deal of the behavior of the officers in Minneapolis. They see that their own people have been scapegoated when they've been doing their jobs to the best of their ability, their thoughtful beliefs and training. And there doesn't seem to be anything solid underneath them or solid behind them.
More than a year and a half after the chase, Jones Drain is arrested.
As I understand, he was not very hard to find. He was hanging out in North Minneapolis. And when they found him, he had a weapon with a switch on it. So I think that it's a good thing that he's been off the streets since then. But I don't understand why it took that long to decide to arrest him.
Then in August, new Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty dismissed the felony charge against Jones Drain of fleeing police in a motor vehicle that results in death, theft of a motor vehicle, and theft of property.
He thought that getting people like James Jeremiah Jones Drain off the street was a very important job, was a very important contribution to make to the safety of all the rest of us. Because as long as someone like that is out there with no consequences, we are all a little less safe. Why would you put your own life, your reputation, your job, your family, your freedom on the line when, on top of that, no matter how well you've documented all of your work, and then you've sent it off to Hennepin County, and they dismiss your charges?
Cummings' attorney, Tom Plunkett, said Mr. Cummings risked his life many times to protect people. He sits in jail. Mr. Jones Drain, a gun-toting thief who bears responsibility for the death of Linnell Frazier and stole from the innocent, gets a break? Minneapolis is a better place to be a criminal than a law enforcement officer.
Here's an interesting thing about Mary Moriarty, who seems to be very, very strongly oriented to those who are charged. She's very uncomfortable with charging anybody, except police officers. That same mindset doesn't look at Brian's situation and see someone who was following the rules, who was serious, as careful as one can be under the circumstances.
Ann Burgett is a twice-endorsed DFL candidate who served on the Minneapolis School Board in the 90s. She says she feels left behind by the political party she once believed in, and in a city she's called home for more than 50 years, as her son-in-law is forced to bike his kids to school and to start over after what his family calls an accident.
This is not to disrespect the death of an uninvolved person at all. That is tragic. But it wasn't a crime. It was a tragic accident.